Star Trek never really dealt with Spock and Picard's greatest tragedy. Star Trek never showed the full aftermath of one of the franchise's greatest tragedies that profoundly affected Ambassador Spock Leonard Nimoy and Admiral Jean-Luc Picard Patrick Stewart. Although there have been several major disasters throughout Star Trek's vast timeline, few cataclysmic events were as devastating as the Romulan supernova that took place in 2387. Starfleet mounted a massive rescue effort upon learning of the supernova, but the rescue armada was mostly destroyed when rogue synths attacked the Utopia Planitia shipyards on Mars. Starfleet then called off the rescue effort and went on the defensive. Introduced in Star Trek, the original series, the Romulans have long been enemies of the United Federation of Planets, and the devastating Romulan supernova altered the balance of power in Star Trek's galaxy. A disaster like this should have affected everyone in the Beta Quadrant, the Federation, and neighboring star systems, but the Romulan supernova has largely been treated as a backdrop for other stories. Star Trek has explored how the supernova affected individuals like Spock and Picard, but has not dealt with the ramifications it should have had on the rest of the galaxy. Star Trek's Romulan supernova sent Spock to the alternate Kelvin timeline. The Romulan supernova was a central plot point of J.J. Abrams' 2009 Star Trek film, as it was the catalyst that led to the creation of the alternate Kelvin timeline. After Starfleet abandoned the Romulan evacuation efforts, Ambassador Spock hatched a plan to stop the supernova using red matter to create a black hole. Tragically, Spock was too late to save Romulus, although he did manage to prevent the supernova from expanding even further. A Romulan named Nero Eric Bana lost his wife and unborn child in the disaster and swore vengeance against the Federation and Spock. As Spock piloted his ship, the Jellyfish, to stop the expanding supernova, Nero confronted him in his technologically advanced ship, the Narada. As a result of this confrontation, both ships were pulled into the black hole Spock's actions had created. Having gone through the black hole first, Nero arrived in the past first, in 2233, where he destroyed the USS Kelvin and inadvertently created the alternate Kelvin universe. Spock emerged from the black hole 25 years later, soon after which Nero forced Spock to watch the destruction of Vulcan. Star Trek Picard Season 1 revealed that Admiral Jean-Luc Picard had led the evacuation efforts and intended to command the rescue armada meant to relocate around 900 million Romulans. After Starfleet halted the rescue efforts in the wake of the attack on Mars, Picard resigned from Starfleet in protest, incorrectly assuming they would refuse his resignation. Flashbacks in Picard Season 1 showed Jean-Luc interacting with Romulan refugees on the planet Vashti, which had been allocated as a Romulan relocation hub by the Federation. Picard befriended a young Romulan orphan boy named Elnor Evan Evagora, but he abandoned Vashti and Elnor after resigning from Starfleet. Star Trek Picard Season 1 revealed that the Romulan Free State emerged in the wake of the supernova, but did not dive into the details of this. The Romulan secret police, known as the Tall Shire, served the Romulan Free State, but the Free State was on somewhat friendlier terms with the Federation than its predecessor had been. Still, how many Romulans survived the supernova remains unclear, and the entire storyline was dropped after Picard's first season. Even when Picard Season 1 explored the ramifications of the Romulan supernova, it was mostly used to illustrate how Jean-Luc had become disillusioned with Starfleet. For all the star systems charted and temporal anomalies resolved, Star Trek has always been about humanity, even when its protagonists aren't entirely human. And among the many faces that have stared into the galactic void, few have been more iconic than Spock and Jean-Luc Picard. Yet for all their brilliance, wisdom, and duty-bound heroism, Star Trek has never fully explored their deepest, shared tragedy, the loss of their people, and the burden of being too late. Let's begin with Spock. The half-human, half-Vulcan ambassador was always a man caught between logic and emotion, forever trying to reconcile two cultures that rarely understood each other. His final mission, the one detailed briefly in the 2009 Star Trek reboot, was an act of pure desperation, an attempt to save Romulus from a supernova by deploying red matter to collapse the star. It failed. The Romulan homeworld was destroyed, billions died, and Spock, a man who had spent decades attempting reunification between Romulans and Vulcans, vanished into another timeline, along with his failure. But the loss wasn't just astronomical. It was personal. The destruction of Romulus represented the death of a dream. For Spock, it was the end of hope that the Vulcan-Romulan divide could be healed in his lifetime. Star Trek never gave us a true reckoning with that emotional weight. We never saw Spock grieve. We never truly witnessed him wrestle with the unbearable truth that even with all his intellect, logic, and centuries of wisdom, he couldn't stop the end of a world. Then there's Jean-Luc Picard, a man defined by restraint, principle, and a haunting sense of responsibility. His own tragedy echoes Spock's, and in many ways was compounded by it. As revealed in Star Trek, Picard, he was deeply involved in the evacuation of Romulus before its destruction. Starfleet, fearing political fallout and rising xenophobia, ultimately abandoned the rescue efforts. Picard resigned in protest. But it wasn't just Starfleet that failed, he failed. Billions died under his watch, and he was left to age alone in quiet guilt on his family's vineyard, the stars too far away to matter anymore. In classic Star Trek fashion, the franchise acknowledged these traumas but never dwelled in them. We caught fragments, brief lines of dialogue, passing regrets, a dusty hologram of Spock in a Romulan archive. But the emotional core of their shared failure, two of the most legendary figures in Federation history, each trying to stop an apocalypse, each powerless in the end, was never truly dissected. Imagine instead what it could have been. An episode or even an arc where an older Picard, still haunted by Romulus, finds himself exploring what Spock left behind, not just data and logic, but guilt, empathy, and the quiet, lonely burden of one who tried to save a galaxy that wouldn't listen. Perhaps he uncovers a message from Spock not meant for public records, a raw, unguarded confession of failure. Perhaps Picard sees himself in it, not as a failed admiral, but as a kindred spirit who understands that sometimes the universe simply moves on, indifferent to your noblest intentions. There's something deeply compelling about that idea, that these two men, paragons of their eras, both faced their greatest trial not in battle, not against a hostile alien species, but against time and inevitability. And they lost. Yet it's in that loss that we see their true humanity. We often celebrate Spock for his logic and Picard for his diplomacy. But beneath the uniform and the speeches, they are both men who have carried the weight of entire civilizations on their shoulders. Star Trek gave us glimpses of this pain, but often chose to move forward, to seek out new life without always accounting for the death left behind. Perhaps that's the point. Star Trek is, at its core, a story of hope, of striving, of becoming, of always looking to the stars. But hope without mourning feels incomplete. To truly honor Spock and Picard's legacy, the franchise should have allowed them more space to grieve, not as captains or ambassadors, but as individuals who tried to hold back the tide and failed. Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't facing the enemy. It's living with the aftermath. Would you like this revised into a script-style format, or want to expand it with quotes and references from specific episodes? We often celebrate Spock for his logic and Picard for his diplomacy. But beneath the uniform and the speeches, they are both men who have carried the weight of entire civilizations on their shoulders. Star Trek gave us glimpses of this pain, but often chose to move forward, to seek out new life without always accounting for the death left behind. Perhaps that's the point. Star Trek is, at its core, a story of hope, of striving, of becoming, of always looking to the stars. But hope without mourning feels incomplete. To truly honor Spock and Picard's legacy, the franchise should have